I knew I was done the second the room went silent. Not from a bomb going off, that would have been kinder, but from Chad Wellington's voice cutting through the air-conditioned hum like a knife to the gut. "You're not management material, Bob," he said, right in the middle of my quarterly systems presentation, loud enough for everyone to hear, cruel enough to leave a mark. Colonel Sarah Hayes, the Department of Defense contracts manager, nearly choked on her coffee. Ashley Wellington, Chad's 26-year-old niece who somehow landed a marketing coordinator position, smirked like she was watching someone slip on ice. And Chad, he leaned back in his leather chair like he'd just dropped some corporate wisdom bomb, arms crossed, looking satisfied with himself. "I'm Bob Mitchell, by the way. 47 years old, been with Sentinel Defense Technologies for 12 years. Navy veteran. Spent 8 years maintaining Unix servers and Oracle databases on destroyers before this civilian gig. Senior engineering manager, the guy who keeps the classified networks running when everyone else is panicking about compliance deadlines." I stood there, laser pointer still aimed at the screen, showing our Q3 cybersecurity improvements. 18% efficiency gain, 12% cost reduction on our legacy Cisco infrastructure. We'd upgraded 2 critical defense networks in 6 months, brought our TS-SCI clearance protocols up to current Pentagon standards. But none of that mattered. Not to them. Not when Chad needed to prove to the board that his Wharton MBA wasn't just expensive wallpaper. "Thank you," I said. Calm. Too calm. My face didn't twitch. My hands didn't shake. But inside, something cracked loose that had been holding for years. 12 years. 3 different CEOs, 4 major reorganizations, and I'd been the one they called when the authentication servers crashed at 2 a.m., when classified systems needed security patches, when the new hires couldn't tell a firewall from a screen door. I'd trained Chad's predecessor. Hell, I'd trained his predecessor's predecessor. Built the network architecture that kept us compliant with DoD regulations while everyone else was still figuring out what encryption meant. But apparently, I wasn't management material because I didn't sound like a TED Talk, didn't wave spreadsheets around like magic tricks, didn't call attention to myself while quietly making sure our $9 million defense contract stayed secure and compliant. Chad moved on like nothing happened. "So anyway," he continued, clicking back to his flashy outsourcing proposal, "we'll streamline overhead by transitioning Bob's legacy systems team into an AI-driven automation strategy. I'll spearhead that initiative with Ashley here." Ashley, who once asked if our internal security protocols were like Instagram, but for documents. The same Ashley who needed help setting up her email encryption because she thought passwords were too complicated for daily use. I shut off the projector quietly, no fuss, gathered my notes, nodded to Colonel Hayes, who was looking at Chad like he'd just suggested using Twitter for classified communications, and walked out before they could remember I existed. Nobody stopped me. Nobody called out. Because the backbone never squeaks until it snaps. In the hallway, I could feel my legs moving, but everything above my neck was fog. The kind you get when you realize you've been swallowing glass for years, thinking it was loyalty. All I could hear was that phrase bouncing around my skull like a pinball. "You're not management material." I walked past the engineering pod where my team sat hunched over workstations, debugging Oracle queries that kept our defense databases running. Past the server room where the Cisco routers I'd configured hummed quietly, handling classified traffic for 3 different military branches. Past the break room where someone had spilled coffee grounds everywhere and left them like confetti from a party nobody wanted to attend. My team looked up as I passed. These guys knew. Jenkins, who I'd taught how to set up VPN tunnels for remote Pentagon access. Rodriguez, who I'd mentored through his security clearance process. Taylor, fresh out of the Navy with communications training I'd helped translate into civilian network management. They could see something had shifted, but nobody said anything. In the military, you learn to read the room. Back at my desk, I sat down slowly and pulled open my top drawer. There, folded neat as a flag, was my original employment contract. Hadn't looked at it in years. Page 4, Section 12. Employee is not obligated to respond to communications outside posted business hours unless explicitly required for critical system failures or contractual emergencies. A strange calm settled in my chest, like the quiet that comes after you finally shut off a machine that's been grinding for too long. I reached over and closed my laptop. It was 5:58 p.m. For the first time in 12 years, I didn't feel guilty about it. At exactly 6:00 p.m., I closed my laptop like I was sealing a coffin. Smooth, quiet, no dramatic sighs, no good night team in Slack, just silence. Nobody noticed at first. I didn't restart the authentication servers that had been hiccuping all week. The same servers Chad had wanted to modernize by outsourcing to some cloud service that couldn't handle DoD security requirements. Didn't forward the urgent compliance email from the Pentagon that Chad had asked me to just handle real quick, a 47-page technical review that would take hours to properly address. I just stopped. It felt wrong at first, like leaving the house without pants, but the deeper I leaned into that stillness, the more right it felt. Like the first time you stop apologizing for someone else's mess and let the pieces fall where they want. I grabbed my jacket, slipped my badge into my pocket, and turned off my monitor. The office was still humming. Someone arguing with IT support near the printer about network access. Ashley too. Cubicles over, probably trying to figure out why her marketing analytics dashboard couldn't connect to our classified networks. Something about firewall permissions she'd never understand. Chad wouldn't notice I was gone until something broke. And in a place like this, running on systems I'd built and maintained for over a decade, something always broke. At the elevator, I paused and pulled out my phone, opened the camera, took a picture of that contract clause I'd highlighted earlier, saved it to a folder labeled insurance, just in case Chad started sniffing around with that tone managers get when they realized the thing they killed was the thing keeping them alive. In the parking garage, my F-150 was one of the last vehicles left. I got in, turned the key, and sat in the dark for a minute with the engine purring. Didn't curse, didn't punch the steering wheel, didn't even feel particularly angry. What I felt was surgical, clean, like cutting off something that had gone bad. Back home, I cracked open a Coors, the good stuff I usually saved for Sundays after working weekends. Set my phone on the kitchen counter and turned on Do Not Disturb. Set the hours from 6:01 p.m. to 7:59 a.m. Added one exception, my ex-wife Sarah, in case our daughter Emma needed something. That was it. Everyone else could figure out their own problems. I'd spent 12 years being the safety net, the midnight fixer, the guy who made other people look good. From tonight forward, they could try duct tape and prayer. Saturday morning, I slept in, made pancakes, fixed the leaky faucet I'd been putting off for months. Around 10:30 a.m., I saw the first missed call. Chad. Then text messages I couldn't read because I'd deleted Slack from my personal phone. 3 voicemails flagged urgent. I didn't listen to them. Instead, I sat down with a legal pad and made a list. Title, Things I Don't Do After 6 p.m. Anymore. Fix Chad's technical presentations. Debug Cisco router configurations during quick emergencies. Explain basic network security to Ashley. Answer emails that start with quick question about Oracle database permissions. Monitor server alerts that should have been automated years ago. Rewrite documentation that Chad claims is too technical for stakeholders. I felt lighter when I finished writing, like someone had removed a 50-pound tactical vest and said, "There, that's yours now." Sunday came and went without incident. By Monday morning, the silence I'd left behind would start speaking louder than anything I could have said. Tuesday morning started normal enough on the surface. Same burnt coffee from the break room. Same awkward small talk by the elevators. Ashley stumbling in with her oat milk latte and permanent confusion about why her computer kept asking for authentication credentials. Chad strutting past with his Bluetooth earpiece and the confidence of someone who'd watched too many leadership seminars on YouTube. But underneath, the ground was already shaking. The first crack came at 8:47 a.m. during the operations sync call. No agenda, no updated metrics, no call link that actually worked, just a bunch of blinking cursors in last week's shared document and a calendar invite labeled recurring do not delete that nobody had touched since I'd quietly set it up 3 years ago. Chad pinged me on Slack. "Bob, can you send today's security briefing slides?" No response. He tagged me again. Nothing. By 9:20, Ashley had wandered over to my cubicle, doing that nervous smile thing people do when they want you to fix something without admitting they broke it. "Hey, random question," she said, like this was Starbucks and not a defense contractor teetering on the edge. "Where do we keep the client authorization forms for new contracts? I think I have everything for the Air Force project except one piece." I looked up from my screen. I was reading industry news about cybersecurity trends, something actually interesting, and kept my voice calm as morning coffee. Final authorizations are locked until security clearances update. Oh. Okay, cool. Ashley nodded, brain clearly buffering like a dial-up modem. So, where do I update those? You don't, I said without any heat. Just fact. Delivered, flat as the weather. They require manual clearance from someone with TS/SCI access and DoD certification. Oh. You mean you? I'm off that project as of Friday, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. Chad restructured the team assignments last week, remember? Ashley's smile cracked like old paint. Right. Yeah, I remember that. Thanks. She scurried off like a squirrel who just realized the bird feeder was full of rocks. By 10:15 a.m., the second tremor hit. Payment issue. The wire transfer to our primary server hosting provider, Data Vault Systems, who handled our encrypted storage for 3 different Pentagon contracts, had bounced back. Nobody could figure out why. There was a long email chain with urgent and please advise ASAP in the subject lines, getting longer every hour. Accounting tried escalating the payment issue, but the workaround I'd built 3 years ago to handle their outdated ERP system's character limit wasn't documented anywhere. Not in our shared drives, not in the company wiki, nowhere Chad's streamlined documentation process had thought to migrate. It lived in my head, along with about 500 other critical processes that kept this place running. The payment system needed a specific 16-character authorization code that had to be generated manually using a combination of our DoD contract number, the vendor's federal ID, and a rotating security hash that I updated monthly. Simple stuff, if you knew the formula. Problem was, I'd never written it down because Chad had always said documentation was inefficient bureaucracy and real leaders adapt on the fly. And I was sitting right there, headphones on, calmly reading a technical article about next-generation firewall protocols while sipping coffee from a mug that said world's okayest engineer. I didn't even flinch when Chad's office door slammed hard enough to rattle the motivational posters on the wall. He stormed across the office, jaw clenched, phone in his hand, showing about 20 unread Slack notifications. Ping, 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 @Bob, please confirm receipt of payment authorization. @Bob, need your input on the hosting issue ASAP. @Bob, Data Vault is threatening service suspension. @Bob, can you please respond? I didn't. My status showed active and I was typing something, but it wasn't for him. I was updating my LinkedIn profile, actually, adding some recent certifications I'd earned on my own time that Chad never bothered to acknowledge. Across the room, Ashley was now half collapsed over her keyboard, frantically calling someone in HR to ask how expense reports work. Apparently she'd tried to process the Data Vault payment herself and had somehow flagged our account for potential fraud because she'd entered the wrong routing information 3 times in a row. One of the junior engineers, Rodriguez, good kid with solid Navy training, was trying to troubleshoot a permissions error on a SharePoint folder I'd created back in 2019. The folder contained every piece of technical documentation for our 3 biggest defense contracts. Problem was, it was protected by a security protocol that required 2-factor authentication through a system I'd set up that integrated with our DoD clearance database. Rodriguez knew better than to ask me directly. He could see the writing on the wall. Instead, he just shook his head and went back to working on projects that didn't require classified access. By 11:30 a.m., our senior project manager, Paul Stevens, decent guy, former Air Force, understood the chain of command, had wandered over with a folder under his arm. He looked like he wasn't sure if he wanted to ask a question or file a resignation letter. We've got a call with the Pentagon auditors this afternoon, he said quietly, keeping his voice low enough that Chad couldn't hear from across the office. Any idea if legal reviewed the final compliance documentation for the base security upgrade project? I didn't look up from my screen. Nope. Do you know where it might be? Same place it's always been, I said, finally turning to face him with the kind of expression you give someone when they ask you to explain quantum physics. Somewhere between Chad's job description and not my department anymore. Paul blinked slowly, processed that for a few seconds while watching Chad frantically typing on his phone across the room. Right, got it, thanks Bob. He understood. Military guys always do. When the chain of command breaks down, you don't ask the guy who got demoted to fix the mess. You find another way, or you watch it burn. The ground wasn't trembling anymore. It was cracking wide open. By noon, the office felt like a submarine taking on water, stress leaking in every direction, phones buzzing with increasing urgency, Slack threads spiraling into digital chaos. Taylor, one of my former mentees, was openly frustrated at his workstation because he couldn't access the network monitoring tools I'd configured. The login credentials were stored in an encrypted file that only I had the key for. An intern from the business development team was practically crying in the supply closet because nobody could tell her if the printer's security certificate error was her fault or a systematic failure. The printer was connected to our secure network, and its authentication protocol was tied into the same DoD clearance system that was currently locked down tighter than Fort Knox. I watched it all like a man watching his ex-neighbor try to fix a lawnmower he'd never maintained. Not gloating, not vindictive, just present, witnessing consequences that were 12 years overdue. Because I hadn't sabotaged anything. I'd simply removed the one invisible force keeping the chaos in check. Me. The email hit my inbox at 2:13 p.m. Quiet little chime that might as well have been an air raid siren. Subject line, compliance review, final documentation required, urgent. Sent from Colonel Hayes, who wrote every message like she was apologizing for existing while also carrying the authority to flatten our entire company with a single phone call. Hi all, circling back on the final review for updated security protocols regarding our upcoming renewal with the Department of Defense. Technical documentation requires Bob Mitchell's digital signature for final approval. Current deadline is Friday at 1700 hours. Please advise on timeline for completion. Respectfully, Colonel Sarah Hayes, DoD Contract Oversight. Simple, professional, absolutely deadly. Because that signature, that was the last domino. I'd known this audit was coming for weeks. I'd built the original security frameworks they were updating, working nights and weekends to make sure we stayed compliant with the latest Pentagon requirements. The documentation was bulletproof because I'd made it bulletproof, translating complex DoD regulations into actionable technical protocols while Chad was still trying to figure out what multi-factor authentication meant. Yet here we were, 3 days from the deadline, a $9 million defense contract hanging in the balance, and nobody had followed up until Colonel Hayes politely reminded everyone that the clock was ticking. I didn't respond to the email. Instead, I forwarded it to my personal Gmail account and changed the subject line to "For Records, Timeline Documentation." Just dropped a time-stamped breadcrumb without comment. Insurance for when the story got rewritten later, because people like Chad always found a way to make themselves the hero when everything went to hell. Chad hadn't even acknowledged Colonel Hayes' message. I could see the Slack thread he'd started with legal instead. Can someone else handle this approval process? Bob's being difficult. The responses were a symphony of bureaucratic shoulder shrugs. Legally, no. The authorization chain had been assigned by name, mine. Changing it now would trigger a complete review cycle, minimum 10 business days. We had 3. I flagged the email and moved on to reading about Lockheed Martin's latest cybersecurity innovations. At 3:17 p.m., Chad finally showed his face. Hovered near my desk like a raccoon sniffing around a bear trap, sweat stains visible under his arms despite the office air conditioning. Hey, quick ask, he said, voice dripping fake casualness. Colonel Hayes mentioned you still need to sign off on the audit documentation. Just wondering if you had a chance to review it. Pretty standard stuff. Should only take a few minutes. I looked up slowly, like I was processing a simple request from someone I barely knew. I'm off that workflow. Well, yeah, but you're still the authorized signatory. That's a legal requirement, not operational. Correct. He blinked twice. Okay, but if you could just give it a quick once-over, just this one time, that would really help the team. I held up my hand. Not rude, just final. My work hours end at 6 o'clock. You'll get what you get before then. Chad looked like he wanted to say something else but thought better of it. He backed away slowly, clutching his phone like it might start bleeding. I didn't watch him leave. Instead, I opened my calendar and blocked off tomorrow morning with a fake dentist appointment. Titled it Oral Health, Personal Time. Was it petty? Maybe. Was it practical? Absolutely. By 4:45 p.m., Colonel Hayes had sent another message, this time just to me. Bob, understand there are organizational changes happening. Just need confirmation on timeline for final security approval. Military appreciates clarity on deadlines. Respectfully, Colonel Hayes. I typed back one sentence. Documentation has been reviewed and noted. Timeline pending operational requirements resolution. Didn't say when I'd sign it, didn't promise anything. Just acknowledged that I had control of the situation, which I did. Wednesday night at 10:47 p.m., Chad sent an all-caps text message, a voicemail, and for good measure, an email that sounded like a man drowning in his own incompetence. Where are we on this? Urgent. Need your signature or we're dead with the Pentagon. Call me back now. 3 suburbs over, I didn't stir. My phone sat face down on the nightstand, dark and silent. The blue glow of unread notifications stayed trapped behind Do Not Disturb like wasps buzzing against glass. I was already deep in the kind of sleep I hadn't had in years. Real rest. The kind that comes when your brain finally realizes it doesn't need to prepare for battle every morning. On my nightstand sat an envelope, not white, not corporate. This one was cream-colored with embossed letterhead. Inside, an offer letter from Lockheed Martin, Senior Systems Architect, Cybersecurity Division. No assistant or coordinator tacked on like training wheels. The salary was 40% higher than what Sentinel paid me. The respect came built in. The recruiter had called me 2 weeks ago. Jim Crawford, former Navy commander who now worked Pentagon contracts. We've been watching Sentinel circle the drain, he'd said during our first conversation. Figured you might want to jump ship before it hits the reef. We need someone who actually knows these systems. I'd scheduled the interview during a medical appointment, aced it in 45 minutes talking about network security with people who actually understood what I was saying, and got the offer 3 days later. Thursday, at exactly 2:30 p.m., calendar alerts popped up company-wide. Subject, all hands. 3:00 p.m. Conference room A, mandatory. No context, no agenda. Just red letters and a time slot dropped onto everyone's calendar like a last-minute court summons. I strolled in at 2:58, coffee in hand. Expression unreadable. Took my usual seat near the back. The room gradually filled with confused faces and the kind of nervous energy you get when nobody knows who's getting fired. Chad arrived at 2:59, looking like he'd been awake for 72 hours straight. His usual confidence had been replaced by something that looked like barely controlled panic. The founder, William Hartwell, entered last. Gray suit, no tie, the expression of a man who'd just discovered his house was built on quicksand. "Thank you for joining on short notice," he began, voice rough like he'd been yelling in private meetings. "We have a situation." He pulled out actual paper, not a tablet, not a projected presentation. Paper. That alone told the whole story. "I received a call this morning from the Department of Defense Contract Review Board," he continued. "They're questioning our capacity to maintain current security protocols." Nobody moved. I sipped my coffee. "Apparently, key documentation is missing final approval. Our largest client is expressing concerns about technical leadership continuity." He turned slowly toward Chad. "Chad, you're the VP overseeing this contract. Explain where we stand." Chad straightened, tried to summon his MBA confidence. "Well, yes, we're experiencing some procedural bottlenecks as we modernize our legacy approval workflows." Hartwell held up his hand. "Stop." Chad froze. "Modernize workflows? Is that what we're calling the fact that a $9 million contract is 48 hours from cancellation because nobody can find the right signature?" The room went library quiet. The Pentagon specifically asked for Bob Mitchell, said he's the only one they trust with their classified systems. They want him personally overseeing the security transition. Hartwell looked directly at me. "Bob, anything you want to add?" I set my coffee down carefully. "I'm no longer assigned to Defense Department contracts. As of last Thursday." Silence fell like a curtain. "And as of this morning," I continued, standing up slowly, "I've accepted a position with Lockheed Martin. I start Monday. 6 of my engineers are coming with me." Chad's face went white as paper. "The Pentagon appreciates continuity in their security partnerships." I said, straightening my jacket. "Lockheed understands that." I walked out at normal pace. No drama, no victory dance, just the quiet satisfaction that comes when competence finally gets the recognition it deserves. By Friday afternoon, the news was official. Sentinel Defense Technologies had lost their primary Pentagon contract. Chad's resignation was accepted effective immediately. Ashley discovered that marketing wasn't her calling after all. Me? I'm sitting in my new office at Lockheed Martin, looking at a team that actually values experience over presentations. Turns out I was management material all along. I just needed people smart enough to recognize it. Sometimes the best revenge is simply proving you were right.